Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Sharby Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content. We are at 83 subs, so shout out to all the new subs in the house. We did a live stream covering the first day of free agency, so the VOD is up with our raw reactions. It was an interesting day, let's just say that. We do have a comment to read from Lockdown Iker on Instagram regarding our short. He said the Spurs were not losers. Stephon Castle is better than Rob, and they are playing the legacy game. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that take because we talked about it on our long podcast episode where after we kind of sat on it, we understood the reason why the Spurs did it. It's just, I'm not a huge fan of just kind of giving away a lottery pick for picks way out, but I understand, the idea of like, hey, we're going to be bad, but I think you could still be bad with Dillingham. But either way, that's a fair point.
Yeah. Before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so day one of free agency, we're recording this, several hours after the 6:01 p.m. Eastern time period of free agency opened up, and it was something, right? Obviously, as of right now, right, we don't have a lot of the big boy free agency signings yet, but you did have a number of players that did sign on day one. Obviously, you had some players that had already signed before, right, because they re-signed with their own teams, but you also had other guys change teams, right? So obviously we already know the guys that have re-signed with their own teams, right? OG Anunoby, Siakam, quickly, Claxton, had some other ones as well, like Malik Monk, Patrick Williams. Day one signings for the most part, right? You had a few of guys that went back to their teams, right? James Harden went back to the Clippers, right? 2-year, $70 million deal, right? Which, again, we knew that he was going to go back, right? Obviously, there wasn't really any other teams that it sounded like were interested in him. He's going to stay with the Clippers, right? Kind of just a no-brainer type deal there.
Yeah, it makes sense 100%. We talked about on the stream, and Trent from Miami Heat Network, he brought up a great point. This is probably going to be their last year running that team. And then, they'll probably blow it up if, they don't find success, which I think a lot of people are expecting. But it makes 100% sense for James Harden to come back. So,
right. Yeah, because even though Paul George, as of this point, as of this recording, hasn't signed yet, everybody's basically reporting that he's going to leave and go to Philly, right? So, obviously for the Clippers, yeah, you lost out on Paul George. Basically, lost him for nothing, which I think is pretty rough. We'll see if they replace him with anything. But it's not great. Obviously, we'll see where the Clippers go from here. Had some other guys, right? Obi Toppin, he re-signed with the Indiana Pacers. Royce O'Neal re-signed with the Suns, right? Those are, again, no-brainers. Those are good players that should help those teams, provided that they continue to get playing time, which they will, right? Max Christie, same thing with the Lakers, right? Didn't play a whole lot last year. But given that you're paying him bigger money now, 4 years, $32 million, like, he's going to play more.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's smart for all these teams to kind of retain their assets and bring these guys back because I think they will be impactful no matter what kind of way you really do look at it. I think it kind of gets more intriguing once you look at the teams that went out and got some new guys and brought in some potential help and, some other interesting moves as well. But yeah, I'm a fan, I think, of pretty much every single move that, brought guys back to their respective teams.
Yeah, Kevin Love went back to Miami. Mm-hmm. DeAndre Jordan went back to Denver. Alex Len went back to Sacramento. And then Boston's bigs, they went back. Bol went back. But now then, we started getting some other ones in terms of guys that changed teams, right? So we had Andre Drummond go from Chicago to Philadelphia, right? Obviously, that's a big deal because Philadelphia is looking to, reconfigure their team right around Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, right? Obviously, we know they have a decent amount of cap space, right? So it sounds like they will get Paul George, but, in the meantime, they did sign a couple other guys. They signed him and they signed Eric Gordon. What are your thoughts on those two signings?
I mean, when it first broke, when we were in our live stream, I think we fell in love with the Andre Drummond move because it gives you an awesome, versatile big man, in terms of what he's able to do on the defensive end and obviously rebounding as well. just to play behind Joel Embiid, because, in previous years when Embiid was kind of hurt, you kind of saw that, Paul Reed was kind of your next best option. And sometimes it just isn't going to work, considering that I think most people consider him more of a four anyways. But yeah, I think you love Andre Drummond coming there. Eric Gordon, I think people are a little bit more shaky on, but I think he provides, a bit of an impact in terms of being able to be like a 3-and-D guy. We saw it in Phoenix. It's just a matter of, what does he look like with his older age? I think for sure, because he's, I think, going on 36 almost. So, he's getting up there in age. But for that kind of money, it's a steal in my opinion.
Yeah, he's played 16 seasons already, and he's going to
Yeah.
be 36 next year. So,
hmm
he can still shoot, right? Obviously, some other aspects of his game are no longer quite as good, but
Yeah.
for a minimum contract, not really that big of a deal.
Yep.
You had a big one, which was a little bit unexpected, but more so just from the perspective of where they went, and it was Caldwell Pope, because there was a lot of talk about Philadelphia might get both him and Paul George, but he ended up going to Orlando on a 3-year, $66 million deal. Reportedly, Denver offered him, a similar-ish amount, but he took the Orlando deal. My guess is the Denver one was probably a little bit less. So that kind of changes, what we thought, of some of the stuff that happened, on draft day, where like Denver basically just straight up salary dumped Reggie Jackson for nothing. Because we thought maybe that might allow them to get a little bit more flexibility to bring back KCP, but that didn't end up happening. So he's going to Orlando, which is a great signing for Orlando because he's a 3-and-D guy. So, which pretty much fits their identity and, in terms of what they want to do. And he's also a guy that's got a lot of playoff experience, right? He was a starting guard for 2 title teams. And so now he joins a young core, Apollo, Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs. So I think that's, of the day one signings we've seen so far, this one I think is the best one, even if it is, again, 20 plus million a year. Not 25, but still, a significant amount.
Yeah, this one clears all of the signings that we saw today, because I think, number one, it shakes up the West a little bit, because now Denver's going to take a huge step back. I think this stings more than people would like to kind of admit at this point. You look at it,
Yeah.
KCP is a huge part of their identity, and I think losing him and not having a solid replacement in terms of a guy that you can really elevate is going to hurt them in the long run. But if you look at Orlando, it's a game changer for them. I think it adds a solid piece, championship pedigree, a winner, known winner. He's got all the experience in the world. And I think adding that to a Orlando team that lacks that a little bit, but also a bunch of guys clearly that are willing to compete. They want to win, and they want to get to that next level. And I think that this move is kind of like the catalyst for them ascending as well. So, it's just a matter of what does the starting lineup look like. You're also expecting big things from Paolo, Franz. We talked about on our live stream. I think their biggest question now is for sure, big man depth. What does that look like? But you cannot hate on this KCP signing, and what a steal by Orlando, to be honest.
Yeah. Another guy that ended up switching teams, Chris Paul, Golden State, left, actually waived by Golden State, which we'll get into momentarily. But first, we'll talk about the signing itself. Goes to the San Antonio Spurs, 1-year, $11 million deal to join Wembanyama, right? Rookie of the year, reigning rookie of the year. Again, it's a signing that, again, we didn't 100% expect. I know there was reporting from Mark Stein that he could go there or go to the Clippers, but I still wasn't really ready to believe it. But it ended up happening, and, this is a quality signing, I think, for the Spurs. Obviously, with Chris Paul, at least for half a season, you're kind of giving up on, ring chasing. But, you're going to play a big part in Wemby's development because we know he's got a good, reputation amongst younger players where, he makes them better, and they clearly like playing with him.
Yeah, this is huge, and not just for Wemby. I think that's number one, but also it's big for their other guys in terms of their guards. Maybe Stephon Castle can pull some things from Chris Paul, Trey Jones. Obviously, Trey Jones probably might not be your franchise point guard, but he could potentially, like I said, learn a couple of things from Chris Paul. And I think, it just adds a level of seriousness that this team kind of lacked last year, where there were a lot of questions about who the heck point guard was going to be. We had Sohan for a little bit. We had, a little bit of Devontae Graham even. So I think this adds a sense of stability. And you can't hate on this deal at all. Like you said, 1-year deal, $11 million. It doesn't sting at all. And I think it's a great move if you're San Antonio, because, you don't have to buy into getting some crazy, all-star point guard or, a star point guard or anything like that. Just sit back, watch the development grow. And I think Chris Paul is the right man for that kind of job.
Yeah. Now we talked about Denver, obviously, getting worse, losing KCP, right? So now you are pretty much reliant on your younger guys, and I think that's kind of rough if you're the Nuggets watching them win a title and then not look to improve really at all the
Yeah.
last two seasons, right? They've gotten worse, season by season, and they're going to be worse again. So that pushes them closer to the rest of the Western Conference. But another team, obviously, it's a little bit, maybe a little bit early to completely, say this, but another team that definitely feels like it's going to be, a different team next, a worse team, at least worst case scenario, a very different team, is Golden State, because obviously now, it hasn't happened yet, right? But we know there was reporting that Klay Thompson, he's not coming back to Golden State, so he's obviously going to be gone, which is rough. And then, Chris Paul, right? They couldn't find anything to trade him with, right? Because there was talk about maybe he goes to Golden State, maybe Paul George opts in and Chris Paul's in that deal, but that ended up not happening. And then all they basically did was waive him. So essentially, Golden State traded Jordan Poole for Chris Paul, but for 1 year of Chris Paul, cut him. So they couldn't really get anything out of him, at least asset wise. And, that's rough. So now clearly they're in the midst of a new direction of the team. Obviously, there's rumors about them still trying to chase some guys, like maybe Brandon Ingram, maybe Laurie Markkinen, right? Obviously, they turned down a Zach LaVine deal where Chicago offered Wiggins, or excuse me, where Chicago was asking for Wiggins, right, and Chris Paul, and Golden State turned it down. But pretty bizarre, from that perspective, that you traded for Chris Paul. We thought it was a questionable fit at the time, but we at least somewhat understood the flexibility aspect of it. But it feels like that trade ended up kind of being a dud, even though I know Jordan Poole didn't have a great season for the Wizards this year.
Yeah, what a waste though, because you would have liked, I feel like, a lot more productivity than what you did end up getting. And even now, like, you probably would have wanted to be able to kind of couple him in a trade package. But like you said, they turned down that offer, which I think speaks volumes to how low Zach LaVine's value is right now, just due to his contract probably, and, questions about will he be playing, will he be healthy, and all that stuff. But yeah, if you're Golden State, I think might be one of the most tragic off seasons that you have to deal with in terms of everything going on. We haven't even talked about it yet, but I'm sure we will be soon. But with Chris Paul departing, especially in the way that he did, and then all the talks about the young guys being in all kinds of packages all over the place, I think the morale is just kind of sunken, and we're just kind of seeing the long term effects of that Draymond punch, I think, if you want me to be real.
Yeah, because there was a lot of reporting about him, not feeling super respected by the organization, right? Not really taking care of him. They weren't going to pay him a whole lot. He may not have even started, and it seems like it got to a point where there is a breaking point. And we thought that we thought he was going to go back to Golden State, but
Yeah.
that ended up not happening. We knew and understood that there was an increasing possibility that he'd be gone, but we thought they might be able to find some number that they could agree with. But it ended up not happening. Obviously, with Golden State's team governor Joe Lacob, right, he had a statement where he was kind of saying, like, goal one, get under the tax, right, and then goal two, kind of put together, a different team, that's going in a different direction. Basically, like, the last sentence he was like, maybe we win a championship. So it definitely feels like if that's kind of the command that you're getting from the top, right? Clearly, a championship is not really a number one goal right now. Maybe, we'll see what they do in the trade market, but, I would have to wonder, like, what kind of comes next for them. Like, if they just strike out in terms of, like, trade deals, I mean, how would they feel about it? Because it sounded like they wanted Paul George. They were trying to trade for him. Steph and Draymond were all in on it, right? Which maybe Klay might be like, oh, they were okay with Paul George, but maybe not necessarily like, rooting for me to come back. I don't know. But a lot happened. And like you said, it's rough, right? It just sounds tough because you thought that maybe they would find a way to kind of retire together. Maybe they do, but clearly it's not happening right now. So
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we're kind of past the era for remedy at this point. I feel like everything has just gone wrong at the worst possible time as well. So it really sucks to kind of see the era end like that. And I think you really feel for Klay at this point because, like you said, he's kind of expecting to be taken care of, but then they're kind of putting the team first and, the longevity of things where it's like,
Hmm.
I mean, are you going to give us productive years if we give you this kind of contract? That he might not. I mean, we saw what he did last year. It wasn't pretty, to go out in the play-in is just unacceptable considering the kind of caliber guys that you had on the roster, really, Steph, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, they're trying to do everything in their power to extend the championship window. And moving on from Clay and Chris Paul seemed like, the catalyst and the number one thing to do here. So I don't know if they have a lot left in their tank, but at least they're able to squeeze one championship out,
Yeah, that makes the
2022.
2022 one seem, even more impressive, like
Yeah,
in the long run, just because it wasn't a year where like they were expected to be one of the title contenders. Like
right.
they kind of pushed everything out because I think even at the time, right? I think it was Bob Myers when he was the GM. He didn't think that they had another title run left in them. Obviously, he did the Wiggins deal right in like 2020 or whatever it was, but outside of that, he didn't really think they had another one. And again, like when he left, that kind of lets you know that like they're going in a different direction.
Yeah.
Like once, like I know that there are people that are kind of retroactively saying like, oh, he wasn't really that good now, but you don't want to normally lose guys like that. Like I mean, and I'm not saying Dunleavy's bad, right? Because like I think he made some good draft picks, but like I mean, and like to be fair, he's in a tougher spot now because like he's dealing with these guys where they're not in their primes anymore on really good contracts. They're all older and they're being paid a lot. So
Yeah.
there has to be some tough decisions made. But I would be curious to see where they go from here, like in terms of where they pivot, because there may be guys that they could trade for. Again, maybe Ingram or Markkinen or somebody else, but I mean I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, Smaller signing Mason Plumlee, right, backup center, presumably for Phoenix, right, leaving the Clippers, so that leaves the Clippers without another center. And then it also, adds a center to the Phoenix rotation, which is nice. Again, it's not like a world-changing, earth-shattering move, but it's something that helps.
Yeah, for sure. And we talked about it. We thought it was all right. We think it,
Yeah,
helps Phoenix and it makes them better for sure. And look at the money too. 3 years or 1 year, excuse me, 3 million.
yeah,
So nothing
basically
crazy.
minimum.
Yeah, nothing crazy. And I think you're fine with that if you're Phoenix because that's all you can
Yeah.
really afford.
Yep. Then another one which I think was kind of unexpected, which came out of nowhere, was Najee Marshall, right? Leaving New Orleans and going to Dallas for 3 years, right? Which is interesting because it's a 3 year, $27 million deal. And basically, it's, most of their non taxpayer MLE. But interestingly enough, that was what Derek Jones Jr. was supposed to get. And there's been reporting now that, the situation has changed and that he's probably gone. I think there's some stuff behind that where he changed agencies. I think he changed to Clutch Sports. And there's sort of like a timeline where like you can't sign a contract within a certain amount of time from when you change agents. It's like 2 weeks or whatever. So, if you're Dallas, you can't really wait around for Derek Jones Jr., right? Because as, has also been reported, they're trying to get Klay Thompson as well. And, you kind of have to do these moves sort of in succession, kind of. So, maybe a sign and trade, we'll see. But, again, we were talking about it in the live stream with another person. And they were basically kind of saying like they think that Najee Marshall may be a better fit than Derek Jones Jr., right? Even though he's not as athletic, right? But he's still like a decent defender. He's probably a better offensive player, better shooter, but also kind of like a guy that's sort of like a tough physical type of player, right? Which may kind of fit Dallas a little bit more than Derek Jones Jr. Even though Derek Jones Jr., like he's a good player, just, unfortunately by the time they got to the finals, they were just leaving him open from three. And that doesn't erase the season he had. He had a good year, but it doesn't feel like as big of a loss, like if you can bring in Najee Marshall.
Yeah, in my opinion, it kind of sucks. It would have been amazing if you could have had
Yeah.
both, but with the new CBA, not possible. And it sucks, but it's kind of funny, comparing the two. And one of our viewers, I think he actually compared Derek Jones Jr. to a female deer in terms of
Yeah.
how he's built and stuff like that. So I think
Yeah,
adding
skinny guy.
yeah, exactly. So in terms of adding, some physicality in Najee Marshall, I think that's awesome. Me personally, I think I really just love what Derek Jones Jr. was able to do throughout the playoffs and what he added on the defensive end because you guys know I'm an advocate for this in terms of athleticism can equate to defense if used properly. So I think that's kind of the one thing that I think the Dallas Mavericks will miss. But at the end of the day, Najee Marshall brings you so much on offense, and he's got a mouth on him, so he
Yeah.
knows what he's doing. And I
Yeah,
think Dallas knows what they're doing with this move as well. And you couple it with potentially Klay Thompson as well, automatic win for them in free agency.
He got into it with Jimmy Butler last season.
Yes.
So, obviously we know he doesn't mind confrontation.
Yeah.
Another funny one that was unexpected was Jonas Valanciunas leaving the New Orleans Pelicans and going to the Washington Wizards, right? On a 3-year, $30 million deal. So basically $10 million a year. We both thought it was, a random signing, but a signing that is fine for the Wizards because, again, as you mentioned, as a Wizards fan, right, you don't have to force Alex Sarr into playing the center spot, right? It's a guy that can that can put up good numbers for you, rebounds, scoring, and whatnot. And it's also a movable contract eventually as well.
Yeah, and the thing that I love about it is really the fit for Sarr, because I talked about on the live stream, the development of Sarr should be our priority alongside our other guys, and I think, this fits in with what we're trying to do. And, the contract doesn't impede on the timeline, because I'm assuming, if they want to try and kickstart the rebuild, get it going within the next 2 years, hey, this guy could be traded, especially if his value is at an all-time high or something like that. I love the signing in terms of what kind of flexibility it gives Washington. And like I said, it's for sure a future move. It just kind of sucks to see other teams that were kind of vying for him to kind of miss out on it. And we talked about it as well. I think it's just that fact that it's a 3-year deal and it gives you kind of longevity and flexibility to kind of be moved at a point where, you might have passed the expiration date of the rebuild. So, but like I said, it does kind of suck to see LA kind of miss out on one of their big targets. But at the end of the day, it's competition. And Wizards, I think, struck gold with this one in terms of what it can mean for their future.
Yeah. According to Mark Stein, he just put out as we're talking that the Clippers could emerge now as a suitor for Derek Jones Jr. So that would be kind of, interesting.
That'd be awesome.
Assuming that Paul George, moves. He said more clarity expected Monday, right? It's still, it's still a Sunday on the East Coast right now. But, so it'll be interesting to see if that goes forward, because he's not Paul George, obviously.
No.
But you got to get something back. But obviously the Clippers are still going in a different direction, regardless, right?
Yeah, I think it makes sense, if they want to bring him in. I don't mind it at all.
Yeah. So we still have some other free agents, that are still, on the board that haven't signed yet. You still have some big names, right? Like Paul George, like we know he's going to Philly, right? But technically he's still on the board. But that one you can kind of cross off the list, right? It's probably going to be 4-year max deal, and then Philly will kind of go from there and figure out how to structure their signings and whatnot.
Yeah, we've already expressed how we feel. Me personally, I'm on the end where it's like, yeah, great regular season move, but I don't think it does anything for your longevity in terms of the postseason. Yeah, maybe as a third option, you kind of see his productivity increase, but come playoff time, which is really all that matters at this point in the NBA, what does Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, and, Joel Embiid look like? Do they even play together in a series at all? That would be my question. Look at his health, look at Embiid's health as well. They don't have great track records, but I know it sounds like I'm hating, but at the end of the day, Philly, you're going to get your top free agent, the top free agent in this class outside of, the ones that have returned already, obviously, and are planning to return to their teams. But yeah, it's a good move regardless of how you look at it. It's just, does it make me think that they're automatic favorites to come out of the East? Absolutely not. I think, it doesn't even really go toe to toe with the Knicks, if you want me to be real.
Right. Klay Thompson still on the board, right? Obviously, as of this recording, right? We're recording on Monday. Woj had put out, we're recording on Sunday. Woj put out that he's probably not going to make his decision, tonight, right? So we'll probably see it later. Really, right now, it sounds like it's basically between the Mavs and the Lakers, right? Where, the Clippers, considering we were hearing other names for them, I know his name was kind of mentioned with the Clippers, and I think Philly as well, but it sounds like it's kind of between those two teams.
Yeah, that makes sense. For me, I think Dallas would be an awesome fit because it gives you an automatic upgrade if if they really get this sign and trade done, because that's kind of something that Dallas is lacking in terms of productivity now. Klay, I don't know what he looks like, But at the end of the day, going into next season, but at the end of the day, he has suitors, and I think rightfully so for sure because of his track record historically. You can't take that away from him. It's just what does the decline look like, and what does he fit? What kind of team does he fit on? And I think Dallas is the best option, but it wouldn't surprise me if another team kind of swoops in.
Yeah, because they have said like LeBron called Klay Thompson like right as free
Yeah,
agency opened. So and he's from LA, so maybe that could be a factor. It's just I'm I'm sort of anticipating he goes to the Mavs just because it feels like we've heard more about what could happen if they do it. But like you said, he could go. He could go to either team, and it wouldn't really surprise me.
right.
Obviously.
Yeah, and with the Lakers one, like, and we talked about it, it really kind of stings if you want me to be real. I think, you you would kind of like Klay Thompson at this point for your kind of consolation prize, but
Mhm.
at the end of the day, I think you really wanted a backup big so you could kind of add some versatility and lineup switches, to have the versatility to put Anthony Davis at the 4 with a reliable 5.
Right. And that's kind of also another guy who's still left on the board, LeBron, right? Obviously, we anticipate he goes back to the Lakers, right? It's just there's a couple of differences in terms of how much he'll sign for, right? He could possibly take a pay cut if it means that it allows them to get somebody with the MLE. But, as of right now, you know, there's not really too many guys left that, you would almost feel like is worth kind of giving up the MLE for,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because obviously, he mentioned he would take one for players like James Harden, Klay Thompson, or Jonas Valanciunas, right? Like Harden, I just don't think was ever really on the board. Like I
Right,
think it was more so like, oh, if he came here and took less money, like I would take less money,
right,
right? Clay, clearly that one is a factor because we're hearing a lot about him communicating with Clay and other stuff like that. But the Valanciunas one, I don't know. I would be kind of surprised if he just was randomly like, yeah, I'll take a pay cut for Jonas Valanciunas. Like I understand it
right,
from a center big man perspective, but I don't know. It's just kind of a funny thing. But obviously, like Valanciunas is off the board. Harden was off the board and was never really on the board anyway. So the only one left is Clay. So if you don't get him, then you almost just kind of wonder like, okay, he probably just takes the full amount. But they do have some trade flexibility as well because there have been rumors about them communicating trying to get Jeremy Grant. We don't know if obviously if that's going to happen because that's the thing really for them in free agency anyways is almost all their roster spots are taken up. So in order to really sign any real free agent of note, they're going to have to find a way to free up a roster spot, right? And if you get like a Jeremy Grant plus something, okay, cool, but I don't necessarily know if it's going to happen because they have 12 players on the roster right now. So, and that's assuming like that they don't bring back like a Torian Prince or a Spencer Dinwiddie, like which both guys are, people say like could easily come back to LA.
right.
So, then that would put it up to like 14.
Yeah, I feel like there's so many factors going on with LA. They have so many decisions that need to be made. But, in reality, I think if Clay does end up in LA, I don't think people are going to be too mad about it because, in all reality, also, like, I think that the Lakers can potentially maximize this version of Clay to the point where you don't feel too bad about him. And I'm sure, like, JJ would find a way to kind of, make sure that he doesn't lose his confidence as a shooter, if you know what I'm trying to hint at, basically. But
Sure.
yeah,
I
me
think
personally, I think Dallas is the best fit. But it wouldn't surprise me if he does end up going to LA.
right. I think the main question for either team would be like, the defense because he's not quite as good defensively anymore, right?
Hmm.
Dallas was one of the top defensive teams, this season, whereas the Lakers were not, right? Although their defense got, better in the postseason. But, obviously if you sign Clay and you're the Lakers, right, then it's like you have LeBron at 40, then you have Klay Thompson, and then we have no idea what their guard, rotation is going to look like.
Hmm.
So that's something where I think it would be kind of intriguing to see if they can work around it. That's probably where you would kind of have to make a trade to find, somebody that kind of fits better there. But, you still probably would like to find some type of center because outside of AD, the other two centers on the roster, Christian Wood and Jackson Hayes, I just don't necessarily know if you can feel great about that for a playoff rotation, maybe for the regular season, but not for a postseason rotation. So, again, and there's other teams that are in, other similar spots as well. But, we're still kind of waiting for some guys.
Yeah.
And then another guy, Isaiah Hartenstein, right? That's another guy, right? That's kind of a big, free agent on the board, no pun intended, right? Where while we were live streaming, right, there were rumors about Oklahoma City, right, kind of meeting with him at his home, right? So obviously, it sounds like that they are probably the favorites to get him, right? I'm not sure if Orlando is on the board anymore because they signed KCP, but if you're Oklahoma City Thunder and you can pull off a Hartenstein signing, that might push Oklahoma City into possible favorites. Obviously, like that doesn't, you don't want to necessarily say like Isaiah Hartenstein makes you a championship team, but it's just from the perspective of if you look at the players they have and the type of players they don't have, right? They don't have a player like Hartenstein because they don't really have any, real center guys, center banger type centers at all. And that's what Hartenstein can do. And if they can get him, then that would be a huge signing because, again, he's a guy that can fit in with what they do. He's a good passer, good rebounder, and has some skill like with the floaters and good touch around the basket. So if they can get him, that'd be a huge get for Oklahoma City. It'd be a tough loss for the Knicks. So we'd have to see how they can kind of fix that center spot. But that would be a huge get for Oklahoma City. And it seems like he's going to go there, but they haven't completely ruled out that he can go back to New York.
Yeah, if he ends up in Oklahoma City, that addresses pretty much most of their needs in one guy. You get the rebounding tenacity, you get the size, which they clearly lacked. And you also kind of put and move probably Chet to the 4, which also makes you a bigger lineup as well. Because if Hartenstein is there, hey, I think, it adds a kind of a support system and a safety net that Chet Holmgren can, potentially use to his advantage and not necessarily like slack on defense, but more so, do a little bit more offensively as well, since you wouldn't have to worry about rebounds as much, or you could double down or whatever the case may be. But I think it's an awesome signing if it does end up happening. And like you said, if you're New York, you got to find a way to stop the bleeding on that one because that could turn really messy, I think, really quickly.
Yeah. Another signing that kind of just came out of nowhere, Kevin Porter Jr. going to the Clippers, right, on a 2-year deal, right? This was a guy that was playing overseas, obviously had some, some off the court issues, stuff going on. But it sounds like he's going to be, back in the NBA and playing for the Clippers. I think once they said he clears, some legal stuff and they, lower his stuff, to like a non-crime and take it off his record. But, obviously, some off the court stuff aside, right? This is, a solid player, that you add to the Clippers. I'm just kind of curious, what you do, with him in the rotation because it's another guard scorer. But, it feels like you may need a little bit more. But either way, like you're taking a flyer on a young guy who was a good player, but obviously fell out of the league for different reasons.
Yeah, I think, if you want to talk about his on-court game, it's amazing. We know that he can score the ball at a very good rate, efficient as well. Walking highlight reel, if you want me to be real. So I think adding this guy is awesome. And it looks like we just got a notification that Derek Jones Jr. plans to sign a 3-year deal, $30 million deal with the Los Angeles Clippers. So pretty much doubling down on what we talked about. So adding, both those guys, I think is a solid W for the Clippers, considering you're losing out on Paul George at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's probably like the MLE. So you lost Paul George. You lost Mason Plumlee.
Mm-hmm.
You replaced him with Kevin Porter Jr. and Derek Jones Jr. So, I mean, not really ideal, but you could have also done worse, to be fair.
For sure. You could have gotten nobody. They might. Yeah. So, like, for day one, I think it's not too bad in terms of the returns that you're able to get in Kevin Porter Jr. and obviously Derek Jones Jr. So, I think it's awesome.
Yeah, you got some finals experience. So, that's kind of funny. We got one in the middle of, a recording. It wasn't the one that we expected, but
Right.
it was a signing. So, some other free agents, possibly on the board. You got guys like Tobias Harris, right? Markelle Fultz, Gary Trent Jr., James Wiseman is another one, right? Kyle Anderson, so Sadiq Bey, I think, is one as well, right? So not a ton of like amazing names. Obviously, you have some restricted ones like Tyrese Maxey, he'll resign.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. We know that that's going to happen. But, again, it's not like an amazing free agency class, right? Obviously, which we expected. But also Miles Bridges, to be fair, is another one. And that's kind of interesting that we haven't heard anything about that one yet. So, in terms of some of these names, what do you think, in regards to like where these guys could or should go? Or, whether or not some of these guys may go back to their own teams. Because like the Bridges one, we've heard absolutely nothing about. I know there's been stuff about like maybe they want a reunion, but clearly he's not going to get what he got before.
Yeah, I mean there's a ton of guys here that I think will be useful at some point to some sort of roster. It's just a matter of like who has the cap for them. Also, what kind of offers would they be fielding? Like, what numbers are we talking about here? But like, I know, like for example, DeMar DeRozan. You're looking at this guy. His move is pretty much predicated
Yeah.
on Paul George, so we're kind of in a holding pattern, waiting for that. Tobias Harris, I'm expecting him to kind of probably go to Detroit. Honestly, they're probably going to throw him a decent bag,
Hmm.
and he can get his shots up there. Gordon Hayward, that's an interesting one. I don't know where he goes.
I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys where it's like, is there even room? Not necessarily like they're not going to get a job or anything, but like what
Minimum
raw?
contract
Yeah,
space.
it's like where do these guys go? I think Markel Fultz, that's an interesting one because I think he has a lot of upside, but there's still a lot of question marks on his outside shooting ability and obviously his defense as well. So, and these guys were on decent teams. Like it's not like they're on horrible teams. Like Markel Fultz, Gordon Hayward,
Right.
Tobias Harris. So I think they'll be
Caleb
able to.
Martin.
Caleb Martin. I think they'll be able to add some things. I think Tyus Jones is one to watch. We've been hearing the sign and trade rumors with that. But yeah, for sure, I think whoever lands him as a backup point guard is definitely a winner in free agency, in my opinion. But yeah, tons of guys here. It's just like, maybe not the best quality, and that's kind of been the sentiment on this free agent class. Is like, yeah, there's a lot of free agents, but none of them make your eyes pop out of your head.
Right, exactly. Which is what we anticipated going into, this free agency, right? We
Hmm.
talked about that it was a relatively weak free agency class, right? Because there were either guys that were going to stay with their own teams and not really change anything, or, it's guys that, you're kind of looking at as support players, not necessarily like star free agent signings. There's one where it's not a free agent signing, but it was, kind of interesting how it happened, right? Because there were reports about that Russell Westbrook could leave the Clippers, and then obviously, he ended up opting into his player option, but now there's a lot of talks and reports that he could probably be traded. And lots of people are kind of saying that it's probably going to be the Nuggets, right? And, what do you think about that? Because that one, feels a lot different from the type of players that the Nuggets would normally have. I mean, obviously, they did have Reggie Jackson, right? Who is, a different player from Westbrook, but kind of another guy who can be, kind of a wild card type player. But, it doesn't replace or make up for KCP, but at least I guess it's kind of something to add to your bench because that's been a major problem for the Nuggets where whenever they go to their second units, they're just not very good, especially when Jokic is off the floor. So if you can get a guy that's a veteran backup point guard, right? That if and also it's a guy that can rebound, it can give you some athleticism, can help you play with some speed, in transition, right? Good passer, right? So there's some things to like. Obviously, you got some other issues where he's not really a good shooter, not a great defender. Obviously, he will sometimes kind of make an effort to do it, but not an elite defender by any means. But again, if you can get him, and also it's a very small contract, 4.5 million, right? Like that's kind of a no-brainer, especially if you're kind of trading away, somebody that doesn't really play. Like that could be like a Zeke Naji, in that deal, or somebody else of that, ilk.
Yeah, for me, I think Denver's kind of triaging a multitude of problems here. Number one, we saw how they looked in the non-Jokic minutes, and it was rough. And I think Russell Westbrook, he'll bring some sort of I guess ability to survive the non-Jokic minutes and probably make it look a lot less worse than it really is. But at the end of the day, they're also trying to remedy losing KCP. But I think if you give him the second unit and kind of like let him command that, I think that's awesome for Denver. I think the fit will work out. It's just a matter of what are you going to give up, like you talked about, probably Zeke Naji or somebody like that in terms of the contract and deal like that. But yeah, like I said, give him the keys to the second unit and you'll probably be able to survive the non-Jokic minutes a little bit better.
Yeah, it's just kind of interesting just because of the fact that there were reports that he wasn't super happy with them, in terms of his role and things like that. So I don't know if his role going to be that different for the Nuggets. Like, I
True.
mean, I would imagine he'd still come off the bench as a backup guard. Like, I wouldn't think he would be a starter.
Yeah, like and how would that work? You know, Russell Westbrook and Jamal Murray in the starting lineup. I don't like that as a starting backcourt. Like I said, I think Russ is great, but he's got to come off the bench at this point in his career, in my opinion. I think he's not necessarily too one-dimensional, but I think he's just too limited in what he's able to do at this point. And that's not to take anything away from him because we know what he does on the boards. We know, he's got the hustle. He's got the ability to go downhill, like you said. He's a willing defender as well. It's just the jump shot in this modern NBA. It's tough to kind of survive that.
Yeah,
And you
exactly.
couple that also like with Aaron Gordon in the starting lineup as well. Jokic, who's not the best 3-point shooter. So there are some, I think, question marks if you do insert him into the starting lineup. But I feel like he's just got to come off the bench.
Right. And then just kind of like a last, kind of just conclusion, I guess, to this episode or whatever, right? Like, say, like a Miles Bridges, like, where does he sign? Do we think that he goes back to, Charlotte, or does he go elsewhere? Like, does he end up going to Detroit or something like that for, more money?
You know,
Obviously, off the court issues, we know.
yeah, barring the off the court issues, it wouldn't surprise me if he does go to Detroit. If I'm not mistaken, I believe he's from there.
Yeah.
So that is for sure on the table. But I feel like this, because I remember I asked you and I agreed with you 100%. When did we feel like he was going to get signed? Did we feel like he was going to get signed today? Monday, Tuesday, whenever. And I guess, we both believe that he'll be one of those guys that's signed at a later date, just because I think everybody's going to be wanting to see what happens with all these wings and fours and stuff like that and all the big guys in the NBA. And where these guys end up landing. And then somebody will take a flyer on him because you look at his numbers and they weren't half bad, not, I guess, ideal for him, but I think to the point where it's like sneaky underrated. It's just, you're also taking a flyer on a guy who has some serious off the court issues, but it wouldn't surprise me if he does end up in Charlotte or Detroit. If you want my
Right.
honest opinion, I feel like I like the Detroit fit a little bit better. And it wouldn't surprise me if like Charlotte just lets him go.
Yeah. And then just one last thing.
Mhm.
Phoenix still seems like they need a backup point guard. Still some backup point guards, waiting in free agency, I guess. Of the ones that are available, which one would make the most sense? Obviously, of course, they're limited in what they can do because they can only really do minimum contracts, right? So, here's some minimum contract point
Oh
guards,
boy,
or
this is
not
going to
minimum.
be rough.
Yeah, so obviously ignore, say like a Markel Fultz or a Tyus Jones, right? Because those
Hmm.
guys may go for more, although I don't know because it depends on how many teams have their exceptions left. So Kyle Lowry, Monte Morris, Kyra Lewis Jr., Patrick Beverly, Cameron Payne, Dennis Smith Jr., Chris Dunn, Aaron Holiday, Spencer Dinwiddie, DeLon Wright. I'm not going to name all of them, right? But those are a lot of the best ones. So, like, of those, say, for example, which ones sound like, if you can get them on a minimum, would, be great for Phoenix?
I'm going either DeLon Wright because of his defensive ability or Monte Morris. I think Monte Morris is a solid sleeper option. I don't think he was utilized necessarily properly in Minnesota, but at the end of the day, that was kind of like a 1 year kind of thing. So, yeah, those would be kind of my two guys. I guess Chris Dunn would also
Yeah,
be,
I was gonna say, I think a Chris Dunn could be kind
yeah,
of a sneaky, solid pickup wherever he goes because he's, played relatively well for Utah the last couple of seasons. So he
yeah,
could
exactly.
possibly be a guy that leaves and goes, elsewhere. Now that he's kind of reestablished himself as a player in the league.
Yeah, great comeback story from him. So, yeah, I think he's another guy to watch out for because I think, like you said, he provides a sense of stability. We know what he can do with the ball in his hands, and we also know that he's a somewhat decent defender as well. So,
Obviously, we're also adding on to some of this the next day as well, right? Because there's been a few signings that have happened since day one. The Paul George to the Philadelphia 76ers signing is official, 4 years, 211 million, 208 million. So obviously a big max deal. Also re-signed Tyrese Maxey, right, in restricted free agency to a 5-year max deal. Also re-signed Kelly Oubre. So, with the Sixers right there, they're loading up, right? Obviously, they brought in Paul George, they brought back Oubre, they brought in Drummond, and obviously they're adding Paul George and re-signed Tyrese Maxey as well. So, now that it's kind of official, what are your thoughts, I guess, for that, official signing? Because now we're seeing the Sixers roster kind of take shape. I think there's still a little bit more room to make a couple of additional moves as well, depending on, who's left over in free agency. But, now now this is done, right? This is pretty much a wrap where, this ends the Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, Clipper era.
Yeah, and it's like, for me, it doesn't change a whole lot. I still think, they're not good enough to beat Boston. However, I think they will be and are better than they were last year, obviously, because you're kind of expecting Embiid's play to carry over from last year. And then obviously adding in a guy like Paul George does actually make you a lot better, exponentially better. Paul George is better than Tobias Harris, so you're kind of expecting them to be better in the regular season. It only just kind of raises more questions for me when it comes to the postseason, because what does Paul George and Joel Embiid look like in the postseason? Do they even play together? Because given the track record and the history we have seen, Paul George miss entire series and miss the entire postseason at times because of his health and durability and things like that. And both these guys are kind of known to disappear in the playoffs. But like I said, no problem for the regular season. And, you got the top free agent in the class that was, expected to be moving on from a team. So I think it's a W for Philly.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you're Philly, you have to do this, right? Because, it's a guy that's coming there. Like you said, he's, of the guys changing teams, he'd be the best one on the market.
Yep.
And it makes you better, right? Does this, I guess you could say this would push them over Milwaukee, right?
Yeah, I would say so. I think I'm more of a believer in what Philly has going on more so than Milwaukee, just because I think this is a more concrete identity.
Yeah, especially considering Milwaukee hasn't really done anything other than, I guess, they signed DeLon Wright.
Right.
Right, I guess maybe as a Patrick Beverly replacement, but they would need to do more. Obviously, we've heard a lot of rumors about Milwaukee looking to probably change the shape of its roster, but we're still kind of waiting, and that would come more so through trades, not necessarily free agency. We also had the Isaiah Hartenstein to Oklahoma City signing right now. That's official. Going there for 3 years, $87 million. Front-loaded deal, so the first year of the deal is about $29 million, right? The last year of the deal is also non-guaranteed, so it sounds like it's a lot of money, but in the long run, it really isn't as bad as it looks. And, again, that's a guy where he plays a position of need that they didn't really have a lot of, right? A guy that doesn't mind playing physical and battling with other centers, right? He battled with Joel Embiid last year. Really good rebounder, good passer, and a skill guy too, right? Not necessarily a shooter, right? But he's got good touch, around the basket. He's got the floater as well. So it's a big signing for Oklahoma City, and it feels like, considering what has happened with, Denver, where they lose KCP. Not that Denver still wouldn't be good, but now does this make you move Oklahoma City, to the top of the Western Conference, in addition to them adding Alex Caruso as well? And also kind of assuming that the young players will get better.
Big time. I mean, I'm expecting, Shea. I think he's not necessarily at his peak, but he's already as good as you can really ask for. I'm expecting J-Dub to get better. I'm expecting Chet to get better. You add in a bunch of size, and we already talked about this earlier in the episode, in terms of what Hartenstein does bring to Oklahoma City. But now that it's official, it kind of just makes you feel like Oklahoma City should be the favorites going into the Western Conference next season. And like you said, alongside bringing in Caruso, now you have an elite defensive starting lineup. Like, they were already very good on defense before, but kind of just sharpening out and rounding out the edges where it's no longer Josh Giddey on defense. Now you have Caruso alongside Lou Dort, Hartenstein obviously there to grab boards. So it seems like their identity has kind of been fully shapen or, sharpened and stuff like that. So, I think this is awesome for Oklahoma City. And then obviously, 2 years later, Topic will also be playing as well, potentially. So I think, they're a lock for probably the number 1 seed once again.
Yeah, especially because, again, their guys are pretty durable, and you expect all of them to be better. And like you said, and I've said, they've added some key pieces as well. So, yeah, again, say like Denver, what's next for them, right? Because obviously, they're not going to be bad, right? They're still going to be able to win a lot of games, but losing KCP does hurt. And now you're kind of expecting one of the young guys possibly to be elevated. I know there's been some talks about if they kind of dump a couple of guys on the roster, like if they dump like Zeke Naji and maybe somebody else, then they can kind of get the mid-level. But then it's like, who's left at the mid-level exception that is okay with coming to Denver, right? And then, there was also talk about them getting Russell Westbrook, but it almost kind of feels like that they're just kind of stuck right now, because it seems like since they've won the title, they've gotten worse, in back-to-back years. Obviously, it took like a monumental Game 7 collapse for them to lose, to the Timberwolves in Game 7. But, there's nothing that I'm looking at right now that makes me feel like they're going to be better. Maybe they might be healthier, right? So then maybe that will help in and of itself. But, I would need to see them do some additional stuff before I would kind of just automatically say, like, yeah, they're a lock. Because, like, they're no longer a lock to be the favorites in the West anymore. Not that they can't win and come out of the West. It's just much more difficult now. Even though, you can kind of move a couple of other teams, below them for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. I mean, look at the roster; it's not great. The depth has gotten worse somehow. I didn't think it could really get any worse, but you look at losing KCP, and yeah, it's a key part of your identity. Weird, you talked about that a little bit, yes. Earlier in the episode as well, but you still have Jokic, you still have Jamal Murray, which I think is going to be a very good and elite duo going into the postseason. It's just, what do they look like in the regular season? And say they do match up against kind of like a team that matches up better than them, and it's like, I don't know what they really look like because you don't have a KCP. There's nobody in this class, and there's probably nothing you can do in terms of trading for anybody that would give you kind of a sense of reassurance about losing KCP. So that's where I think it's a lose-lose situation for them. And yeah, they might just take a step back and kind of be banking on Jokic and Jamal Murray to carry them through the postseason, which has happened before, but who knows? We'll see. I feel like KCP was just so integral to everything that they did in their postseason runs that you can't replace him.
Yeah, and like, again, there's been reporting about that their offer was similar, but I guess if it's similar, then you kind of go to Orlando just because, there's no state income tax, so you can kind of keep more of your money. And it's like he also already has 2 rings, so there's not as much of an incentive for him to just be on a winning team like that's going to win a title.
Yeah.
Just get your money at this point.
Yeah.
Um, Another guy that we're kind of waiting on, I guess, DeMar DeRozan, right? There's reports that he's not coming back to the Bulls. But the question is, where does he go? And then in addition to that, how much is he going to be signing for, right? Because, you say you look at the Detroit Pistons, which I guess we can also mention, right? They signed Tobias Harris to a 2-year, $52 million deal, right? So that kind of lowers the amount of remaining cap space that they have, assuming that they also do the Hardaway trade, as well, where that's basically a straight up salary dump. I know Quentin Grimes is in there, but Hardaway makes way more. So where can DeRozan really go at this point? And is it possible he might just be one of those mid-level exception guys? And if so, like, what's the ideal spot for him?
I mean, from what I've heard, the Clippers makes a whole lot of sense considering, but I think
right. They've already
Derek,
used it though.
Yeah, Derek Jones Jr. So I don't know where the heck he goes. And honestly, I really don't even think it matters because, I mean, does he push a team into contention? No. I mean, who even has a mid-level exception left at this point?
Right. Yeah. Some teams, in order to get it, would need to free up some space.
Yeah, and like, who would be willing to do that for DeMar DeRozan? Like, do you have any names? Because me personally, I don't. I don't know where he goes.
Yeah, I don't know.
I thought he was a lock for the Clippers, but they decided to go Derek Jones Jr. Nothing wrong with that, but
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there haven't really been like a lot of, rumors about him other than I guess, that we just know that he's leaving the Bulls, right? But like there haven't really been a whole lot of discussions about where he's going to go.
Yeah.
But what do you think of the Tobias Harris signing for Detroit?
I mean, like we said yesterday, when he was official or unofficially free agent. Yeah, like, I mean, we said Detroit would throw him a bag. He was going to take it, and he's going to be able to play there and, play with no expectations. Because, I mean, the only expectation Detroit probably has is just be better than last year, which isn't hard, considering the fact that, you just drafted Ron Holland. You also got Tobias Harris. So, they're stacking up on talents. I'm expecting them to not necessarily be exponentially better, but significantly better than last year.
Right. Yeah. And then again, we're still, waiting on some other guys that could be possible mid-level guys. We don't have to go into that, right? But like, again, guys like Kyle Anderson, I think Jalen Smith already signed with the Bulls, right? And then, even a guy like a Reggie Bullock, but we're not going to get into all that. But there was a big story that came out right before, we came in and recorded. Actually, two. The first one you had was the Derek White max extension with the Celtics, right? So obviously he signed a 4-year, $126 million extension. So he's going to basically be making $30 million a year. But again, he helped you win a title, so there's not really an issue with that. But then the bigger story is that the Celtics ownership group seems like they are going to be selling the team relatively soon, right? According to them, it says they're going to sell a majority interest in early 2024 or early 2025, with the balance closing in 2028. So, Wick Grousbeck, right, who is the governor of the team right now, he's going to remain there until 2028, but they're going to open the process to selling. I guess the question is, I guess other than if it's a situation where it's selling high, what's the reason behind this one? Because now this is like the second or third, owner that has sold their team or sold their majority share within the last year or so, right? Because you had him, possibly, you have Cuban that did it, right? Jordan did it, and then I think the Bucks person, I think, also did that relatively recently as well, and the Pacers, I think, maybe. So where is this coming from?
I mean, I think it's like, for some teams when you win a title,
Right.
and you kind of just add to your repertoire and add to the team's history, sometimes you just got to get out of there. It takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of manpower to run a team. It's a very stressful job, but that's kind of what I think. And then obviously the other half would be, if you suck at owning a team, you probably shouldn't be owning a team. The other guys that you mentioned just were not good owners in terms of what they were doing with their respective franchises. And you kind of look at it, once they sold their franchises, they started kind of going on the up and up in terms of the team and the play and all that stuff and the morale. So I think that's kind of what's going on here. I think this is kind of like a ditch effort and selling high, like you said, coming off a championship. I think their value is going to be, peak.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it'll be interesting to see, who ends up, basically kind of throwing their hat into the ring in regards to who's going to, buy in. But we don't know, right? We don't have any names, but, that could possibly kind of change, obviously, some stuff for Boston eventually, right? Because if you get, let's say you have, a team governor that isn't as interested in just spending money, right? Then that maybe down the line, once they have to make some tougher decisions, that could change some things. But obviously, if you have a really good one, then it doesn't really change anything.
Yeah.
So we're still kind of awaiting, other signings such as Klay Thompson and others, right? And obviously we'll be reacting to those as those happen, but for now, so far we got a good chunk of the, big deals out of the way, but we're still kind of awaiting a few, some other impact guys. So now we've also gotten word that Klay Thompson is now going to the Dallas Mavericks, 3-year, $50 million deal. According to Woj, he took less money than what was offered from other teams, and also less years, because other teams offered 4 years. He took 3 and less money. I guess this was more so like, all right, I'm leaving the Warriors, so I'm going to go to another winning situation, right? Obviously for Dallas, this is a team that just went to the NBA Finals, right? Obviously they couldn't match up with the Celtics, but they did add on a veteran guy who's been on multiple teams, right? And you're not as reliant on him as he was in Golden State. He's not the same guy anymore, but he could still be a useful piece. But also, this is a 3-team deal, so it sounds like Josh Green is going to the Charlotte Hornets, right? We don't really know what's going to Golden State yet. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Warriors the Mavs have a trade exception, so it's possible that they could just be absorbing him into the trade exception without having to give anything up, and they're just moving Josh Green to Charlotte. So with this deal, if this is to happen, which is pretty much what's going to happen now. So now you're adding on to the Kyrie, Luka, backcourt, right? Obviously Klay, played 2 guard, but now will be moved to the wing. And then if you're the Hornets, you're getting a young guy, Josh Green, who can kind of go in there and possibly be maybe starting 2 as opposed to like a 3, which he was in Dallas. Because you probably don't really want him to necessarily be a 3, but with the Hornets, he can be like a 3-and-D guard there. So, kind of an interesting, a nice grab for Charlotte. But obviously the main story here is Klay going to Dallas.
Yeah, I think this is awesome for, Dallas. You acquire somebody who kind of fits your identity. It's a direct upgrade. It's a guy who can shoot the ball for sure. I think we'll kind of have questions about what he looks like on the defensive end. Not anywhere near as like, elite as he used to be. But regardless, I think it's a direct upgrade over Derek Jones Jr. and also, bringing in Najee Marshall. I think you kind of feel really good about those 2 signings. If you're Dallas, and it's a direct upgrade, like I said, and also, it's a for sure win now move. Obviously, they're coming off the finals, so adding on to a backcourt that we know can be successful enough to get to the finals, I think is the right move here.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's just interesting because it is less money, But it is a spot where it's a winning situation because,
Right.
again, they just went to the finals and their floor is pretty high, right? Where it's like, as long as Kyrie and Luka are relatively healthy, they're going to be, a top, 4 seed in the Western Conference
Yeah.
for
Do
sure. So
do
that's,
we know where the other offers were? Sorry to cut you off.
yeah. So it sounds like, it sounded like it was mainly Dallas and the Lakers, right?
Okay.
I guess it sounds like those were kind of the final two teams. It sort of is sort of being reported, I guess, kind of that like the Lakers could have been an option, but also that like for the Lakers, in order to get him, it'd be much tougher to pull off. Because say like with Dallas, you can just give up Josh Green and basically send him to Charlotte, and you're not really losing a super pivotal part of your team. But say for the Lakers, if you're going to do a sign and trade, you have to give up somebody that's at least like a decent player on the roster, right? Because like you'd be giving up like a Rui or somebody else like that, and if Golden State's not trying to take on any extra players, which it doesn't sound like they are, at least as of right now, then that's the other factor too, right? Because you'd have to get possibly a third team in that deal. So it comes down to, it sounds like Dallas's situation was a lot easier to pull off in terms of bringing Clay in. So, again, that's tough if you're a team, that lost out on him. Because, like, say, like with the Lakers, like, there's no one else really left. Like,
Yeah.
what do you do? Like, what's the next guy you're going to try to bring in? Like, DeMar DeRozan? Like, that's
Right.
even though he's a better player than Clay, if that were to happen, that's a much more difficult fit next to LeBron and AD. So,
For sure.
that would be, that would obviously be a great grab for Dallas.
Yeah.
It sounds like, okay, so now Chris Haynes is saying Golden State is still working through details with Dallas, and I'm told the deal is not close at this point. I don't know why he's the only one saying that, but everyone else is saying it's done. Maybe they're just trying to add extra stuff, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess it's another situation to monitor, and obviously, if there's another update, we will stitch that onto this video as well.
Yep. And then also Nick Batum joining the Los Angeles Clippers in a reunion. 2 years, $10 million deal. Not really the reunion I would have expected, but, hey, if you're the Clippers, like, yeah, you lost out on Paul George, but, you did add some other guys. Like, you added Derek Jones Jr., you added Nick Batum, you added Kevin Porter Jr., so, again, kind of interesting.
I mean, yeah, they acquired another role player, like we talked, like you just said. He's been on the Clippers before, and I guess he's still got something left in the tank. You kind of saw that towards the end of the season for Philadelphia. So, he's a solid wing. He can shoot still, definitely could still defend. So I don't hate the pickup. I think people are still kind of reeling over the fact that, Paul George is gone, and that whole PG Kawhi era did absolutely nothing for the Clippers.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, is there a signature Paul George Kawhi moment together?
If you want me to be real, no. I think they put up some very awesome performances, but it's like together, obviously, but nothing that makes me like put them like top 5 duo all time or anything like that, obviously, or even like a top duo all time in general. So pretty forgettable if you ask me. I think the marketing for it was awesome. Like, the hype for it was real, but it just never lived up to the expectations.
Yeah, I don't know, but what do you think? What do we think of the Chris Haynes thing, though? Like, what do you think? Where do you think that's coming from?
I mean, I like the wording up until the part where you said not close at all. That worries me, considering I think it was Woj who put out.
Yeah, it was Woj and I think Shams as well. Both of them.
So Woj and Shams put it out, and it's like
Chris Haynes put it out too.
Yeah, I do. I trust Woj and Shams, but I know with Chris Haynes, he's very close with the players. So that's kind of what is making me a little bit skeptical. But at the end of the day, like,
I think this is still probably going to happen.
I think it's going to happen. I just think the details are probably going to look a little bit different. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, Jake Fisher is saying what goes back to the Warriors has not yet been finalized. So that's probably kind of the final piece where they're trying to figure out, like, what goes there. Because that's the thing about, like, a 3-teamer deal is that those can sometimes be a little bit harder to execute because you have to figure out, like, what are we sending, to each team and all that. But, like, I mean, I don't know. Like, just kind of wild, just kind of random. But, it's just funny because we've had to kind of, because now... So now Anthony Slater for The Athletic is saying the Warriors haven't agreed to any Klay Thompson sign and trade to Dallas at this point. Could still happen, but negotiation/finalization would still be needed. So now you have a second guy coming out saying that this isn't official. So I don't know what's up with that.
Yeah, I mean negotiations. I'm
Yeah, he
I'm
said
going
could
to.
still happen, but negotiation/finalization would still be needed.
I just feel
So
like if we're hearing it from Woj and Shams, I just feel like those two guys have so much credibility in the NBA world where it's like it's gonna happen. Like, and the way that they worded it was Thompson agrees to a 3-year deal with Dallas as part of a multi-team sign and trade. So that signifies, I think, that it's going to still happen.
right,
Like you just said,
just
but
gotta
it's the
figure out
minor
some loose ends.
details. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just wow, what a developing story. Just kind of funny, right? Because we were we were recording and adding extra stuff in, and then right as we were done, then the Clay news breaks out, and then we go back to record, and now there's even more stuff about about what might happen with the deal. But again, I guess still probably happens, but maybe Golden State is not, if they're doing it, they probably would like to get something back from Clay, because what would the point of a sign and trade be if you're Golden State, if you're not going to get anything back? Like, I would think you'd want something.
Right. And I think
But
that's
if you're
what they're
Golden
figuring
State,
out.
what do you want back? Because we thought it might be Josh Green, but if he goes to Charlotte, then you know what goes from wherever to Golden State?
Yeah, that would
Like, is it
intrigue
something
me.
from Charlotte?
I mean, what kind of capital do they have to give up though? Like, what are their assets looking like? I'm gonna assume nothing that would help Golden State win now.
Right. Also, not them not paying, like, not even wanting to pay 3 years, 50 million is kind of insane to me, because like that's such a low, annual value.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, just kind of a funny developing story. So we'll see what goes on from here, but just yeah, but it still sounds like regardless of whatever happens, Clay's definitely not going back to Golden State. So that's already done. That's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Obviously this concludes day one of free agency, right? So obviously we'll be recording another episode on Thursday, right? Which will be further along into free agency. So hopefully we'll have some more signings. We'll try to pull up to do some live streams at different points in the off season as well. So keep in mind, check out all of that. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We appreciate the support. We also appreciate the new subscribers and people that came in to our live stream earlier today, right? So shout out to them, right? So hopefully we either see you in the next live stream or we'll see you on Friday for the next episode.